Parthia's successes would have been impossible without their deadly bows and well-trained horses. To war, you need weapons, and we invite you to see the weapons of the previous century up close in the sponsor of this video, War Thunder. It's the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, where you take military vehicles from the 1920s to today into intense PvP combat. The coolest thing is how the battles mix in aerial and naval elements for an awesome combined arms experience, the modern hammer and anvil indeed. Made even more intense by the brutal sound and visual effects on the battlefield, including a damage X-ray feature that shows the fine details of the destruction. They've got over 200,000 vehicles to try, modelled down to their individual components, but also with in-depth customization. Join the fight now on PC, PS5 or Xbox Series X and S, or on older generation consoles, but make sure to do it via our link below to get a large bonus pack that unlocks premium vehicles, boosters, discounts, and free premium account time, available to new players and to those who haven't played for at least 6 months. It comes with an exclusive 3D decorator for your vehicles, but is only available for a limited time. Hit the link in the description. The Parthians are an elusive empire to study, particularly due to the lack of sources from the people of Parthia themselves. The Romans wrote plenty about the Parthians, but being their traditional archenemies, they often paint the Parthians in a negative light. So while we can claim some information from Roman writers, they should always be taken with a grain of salt. Additionally, some Chinese sources also mention Parthia, and the Chinese emissary Gan Ying is said to have gone to Parthia on his way to find Rome. Beyond the written word, archaeology also helps us piece together Parthian society. In the land once ruled by the Parthians, archaeological sites such as Nisa in Turkmenistan have a significant Parthian presence. Moreover, an extensive corpus of coins allows us to establish a dynastic cohesion of Parthian kings. These coins often have Greek inscriptions on them, implying that the Parthians maintained continuity with the post-Alexander Hellenistic rulers who controlled Persia before them. Before we get into how the Parthians ended up conquering the Middle East, let us first take a broader look at the ancient world before their rise to power. After the death of Alexander the Great, most of what had once been the Persian Achaemenid Empire was taken over by one of his generals, Seleucus I Nicator. The Seleucids had a unique approach to ruling the Achaemenid core, managing their empire in conjunction with the noble families of the former Achaemenid Empire in a sort of large web of social networks. As a result, the empire was more decentralized than other Hellenistic states, which lent itself to a more flexible cultural policy. Hence, while the Seleucids promoted aspects of Hellenistic Greek culture, such as the worship of Apollo, Persian culture remained strong, albeit coexisting with a panoply of other cultures in the Seleucid domain. In the west, the Seleucids ruled parts of modern-day Iraq and Armenia, where a diverse array of peoples, such as Jews, Babylonians, Armenians, and Greeks, lived. These regions were more or less the most stable of the empire. However, they were also battlegrounds in wars with powerful states like the Attalids, Ptolemies, Romans, Armenians, and Pontics. In the east, the empire lost its provinces to the Maurya Empire early on in the late 300s BCE. This region was also fairly diverse and would come to play an important role in Parthia's formation. Finally, in the north of modern-day Central Asia lies a vast steppeland that was important for trade throughout human history, and during this time was populated by nomadic, predominantly Iranian-speaking peoples. These peoples were often considered barbaric by both Greeks and Persians, due to such habits as having women archers on horseback. Their Zoroastrian religion was far different from the one of the Achaemenids, as they worshipped many deities rather than one. It is from these northern steppelands that the Parthians would arise. The story of the Parthian Empire begins around 247 BCE, in the land of Chorasmia. During this time, the Hellenic kingdom of Bactria had declared independence from Seleucid Persia, causing a struggle between the Seleucids and what they saw as a breakaway province. Meanwhile, in the lands between the Aral and Caspian Seas, a Scythian-adjacent people called the Pani were organizing under new leadership, with two brothers called Ashk or Arsakes and Tidad or Tiridates, managing to unite the many tribes of Parthia under their rule. Newly unified, the Parthians instigated revolts in the north and managed to take the regions of Hyrcania and Chorasmia from the Seleucids. Seleucus II was fighting a war with the Ptolemies at the time, and was unable to fight back effectively. Thus, the Parthians solidified their conquests, establishing the first capital, Ashgabat, which was located somewhere around modern-day Turkmenistan. The Seleucids pushed back against the rising Parthian tide in 209 BCE, when Antiochus III defeated the Parthians in battle, making them his vassals. However, this fealty would not last for long, as the Parthians soon broke free and started growing once more. The small Parthian state saw its first large expansion under Merbad I, or Mithridates I, the first royal to assume the old Achaemenid title of King of Kings on his coinage. Between 160 to 140 BCE, he initiated a lightning campaign against the Seleucid Empire, which resulted in massive conquests in Media, Babylon, and Seleucia on the Tigris. These newly annexed territories would later become core territories of the Parthian Empire. But at the onset, Parthian control of these lands was tenuous. The locals in these cosmopolitan, city-dense regions had a very urban-centric view of nomadic peoples, considering them to be underdeveloped baboons. The Seleucids made a final attempt to regain their lost territories when Phraates or Farhad II ruled over Parthia, and initially saw significant success in this endeavour, as the locals saw them as liberators, delivering them from the yoke of Parthian barbarism. However, the reconquering Greeks enraged the people of the reoccupied territories with their outrageous economic demands. Thus, they revolted, allowing the Parthians to counterattack in 129 BCE and drive the Seleucids back to Syria. This ended all hope for a Seleucid reconquest of their Asian heartland, and they would remain a diminished rump state until they were finally annexed by Pompey and the Romans in 63 BCE. Although having replaced the Seleucids as the masters of Persia, the Parthians adopted a lot from their Seleucid forebears, emulating their ruler cults and uses of Achaemenid royal vocabulary to ensure their rule was adapted to local circumstances. Once the Seleucids were defeated, the Parthians pivoted east, for they were under nomadic assault. The Scythians, nomadic Iranian cousins to the Parthians, were rampaging west from their homeland in what is now eastern Turkestan. Parthian king Phraates and his successors tried to stop them but failed miserably. Meanwhile, rebellions had broken out in the western provinces, including in the Arab kingdom of Caracini. Overall, the Parthians were learning that conquering land was one thing, but defending and holding it was another. However, around 123 BC, King Mithridates II ascended to the Parthian throne and began righting the ship of state. After solidifying the Parthian grip in the west, he turned to the eastern provinces to deal with the nomadic incursions, where he pushed the Scythians back to the far side of the river Oxus and turned their newly founded kingdom of Sakistan into a vassal state. Mithridates was the first Parthian to rule as a neighbour to the Romans, who reached the Euphrates at around this time. During this period, the kingdom of Armenia also bordered Parthia and was engaging in many conquests across the region. Mithridates initially tried to woo the Romans into an alliance against Armenia, but the infamous Sulla contemptuously rejected them. Mithridates, who felt slighted, instead joined forces with Armenia and Asia Minor against the Romans, initiating a vendetta that would last centuries. After the death of the able and powerful Mithridates II in 88 BC, the empire was rather stagnant. Armenia, meanwhile, was conquering as far south as Ecbatana, causing the Seleucid rump state to invite the Armenian king to occupy the throne of Syria and claim himself to be the king of kings, in direct contradiction to Parthian royal ideology. The Romans, alarmed by the expansion of Armenia in Asia Minor, offered a treaty to Parthian king Phraates III, who took it, resulting in a rare example of Roman-Parthian cooperation as they worked to contain Armenia. However, this did not change the Roman perception of the Parthians as a lesser entity, something they would regret later. Before we continue on to the epic wars with Rome, we must first understand how the Parthian military worked. The Parthians built their military using their old nomadic traditions, while adapting it to also function in wars with sedentary empires, such as the Seleucids, Armenians, and Romans. In general, the Parthian army was de-standardized. Parthian rulers usually let local kings rule various regions of the empire in their stead, and so had to call upon these royal vassals to amass local troops based on demand. The core of the Parthian army, called Spad, had a corps of cavalry and archers, usually Iranians, who were trained in such arts from their infancy. Due to their nomadic roots, Parthians generally favoured cavalry warfare because it allowed for flexibility and speed in engagements. Using arrows, the Parthians would work in Simpsons-style hit-and-run tactics which would confuse the enemy and provide lightning bolt strikes that left their enemies weakened and demoralized. Wars with Rome began after the fall of Tigranes the Great of Armenia. The Parthians, who had on occasion cooperated with the Romans, had installed members of the Parthian Arsacid dynasty in various Caucasus states. In addition, after Pompey's invasion of Armenia, initially fruitful negotiations fell apart after disputes arose over the fertile crossroads of Mesopotamia. As a result, a few years later, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the Scrooge McDuck of ancient Rome and great sponsor of the first triumvirate YouTube channel, initiated a campaign against the Parthians, which ended disastrously. In the infamous Battle of Carrhae, Parthian troops faced the Roman legions and managed to brutally defeat them. Crassus was captured and was executed either via decapitation and becoming a theatre prop, or by being made to swallow molten gold. Crassus was not the only Roman military leader the Parthians humiliated, as they also ambushed Pacorus in 51 BCE, fought off Cicero when he was governor of Cilicia, and went toe-to-toe against both Mark Antony and his arch-rival Augustus on separate occasions. The end result of all this was that the Parthians succeeded in taking over parts of the Caucasus and Mesopotamia, and installing vassals in their place. Over the 1st century CE, many wars between Rome and Parthia were fought in Mesopotamia, inflicting horrors upon the locals and resulting in some territorial changes. It was here that some of the instability of the Parthian mode of government unfolded. Many Parthian emperors would often assume power through palace coups against their sons or brothers. The Romans would, on occasion, use this to their advantage to secure some sort of peace. Moreover, the Romans were also capable of fomenting rebellions in Parthia's decentralized provinces, which, as previously mentioned, exercised considerable self-rule. One of these rebellions, led by a man named Gondophares, took place in the eastern end of the empire. The campaign resulted in the maximum ever extent of the Roman Empire, as well as the fall of Ctesiphon, Parthia's capital. This was an unstable victory, however, and the Parthians quickly regained many of these territories. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, was a geopolitical realist, preferring to maintain the Euphrates as a border. Under Parthian king Vologases III, the Parthians continued to regain ground, but the Romans turned the tide against them, and in AD 165 once again entered Ctesiphon. Some western Iranian provinces were thus ceded to Rome, and the unstable Parthian government was unable to make further gains. This was what enabled Emperor Septimus Severus to attack and capture Ctesiphon again in AD 197. This time the Parthians were firmly in decline, and they would soon lose control over their western vassals, like Armenia, to Roman control. Some of these fortunes were reversed in AD 217, when Artabanus V defeated the Romans in battle. This was, however, too little too late for the once mighty empire. Fratricidal strife with his brother Vologases V led to chaos in the empire, one that a small dynasty led by a man named Ardashir would soon exploit. Having now provided an abridged version of Parthian history, let us now look at the empire's culture and society. As previously stated, Parthia was an amalgamation of the nomadic culture of its rulers, the Achaemenid and Hellenistic culture of its forebears, as well as the myriads of local cultures of its subjects and vassals. Parthia was more decentralized than its predecessors or successors, with much more focus being put on local vassal kings than satraps appointed by the central government. Parthian society was not without its innovations. In particular, the Romans greatly admired Parthian irrigation techniques and deliberately emulated them. This also suggests that, although generally taking a hands-off approach to their vassals, the Parthians still had an active hand in guiding their agricultural and economic output. Trade with The use of Greek probably was appealing to many Parthian vassals, who preferred it over the Parthian language, which they saw as barbaric. Both the Iranian and Greek pantheons seem to have been worshipped across the empire, and local religions, such as that of the Jews, Babylonians, Armenian pagans, and even proto-Christians, Buddhists and Gnostics, had some place in the laissez-faire empire. With that said, the Parthians placed a great deal of focus on Ahura Mazda, the high god, as well as Anahita, the fertility goddess, and Mithras, the sun god, a well-known triumvirate of deities in Iranian polytheism. In Ctesiphon, government was arranged based on two councils, one of the great nobles and one of the elders and magi who advised the king. This was an intriguing deviation from Achaemenid norms, but it is unclear what the exact functions of these two councils were. While much has been said of the Parthians' love of Greek culture in coinage, for which many 20th century Iranian nationalists chastised them, the Parthians were an adaptable and diverse people. Some Neo-Iranian cultural revivals actually began under rulers such as Vologases I in the 1st century AD, who put on his coins a quintessentially Persian fire altar with a sacrificing priest. The Parthians did also appear to have continued the norm of using ruler cults, something which many Iranian dynasties did. Parthian art and architecture was also very diverse and syncretic, with archaeology in the western provinces revealing buildings that are influenced by Achaemenid, Hellenistic, and Mesopotamian forms. Some of the most important features of art from the later Sasanian and Islamic periods, such as the Avan and stucco decoration, have their origin in the Parthian period. We can thus see that Parthian culture was a product of its Hellenistic and Iranian origins, with remarkable flexibility and syncretism. The Parthian Empire, like many of its vassals, was in decline by the 3rd century CE, torn up in a civil war between dynastic claimants Artabanus and Vologases, while a new regional ruler from Ardashir-Kawara in the south of Persia, called Ardashir I, rose to prominence via conquest. In 224 CE, he managed to conquer the city of Ctesiphon and crowned himself King of Kings. This heralded the end of the Parthian Empire, and the beginning of the Sasanian Empire was much more centralized and Irano-centric than Parthia, and followed a very different path in terms of governance. However, as we have seen, some of Parthia's innovations survived in culture and architecture. Legends even claim that Mani, the founder of Manichaeism, who was born on the border between Iran and Iraq, claimed descent from Parthian kings. The Parthians today are usually remembered as an enemy of Rome, and by some as a bizarre Hellenizing outlier in Iranian national history. However, Parthia produced a great deal of artistic, cultural, and economic innovations, refusing to stick to one type of governance. Using Hellenistic, Iranian, nomadic, and many local types of cultural and political organizations, the Parthians produced a tumultuous yet innovative empire in between the Silk Roads. Parthia stands out as a nexus point which transformed Iran and its surrounding regions, and its achievements are still with us to this day. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Enter PvP for all skill levels in this massive vehicle combat game on PC and consoles, and make sure to grab our large free bonus pack with premium features. Get it all via our link down in the description. More videos on ancient empires are on the way, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps us immensely. Our videos would be impossible to produce without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.